I still remember the exact second the room turned against me. My name is Sarah Williams, and at my own daughter's wedding, her fiancé Jason Reed looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, and smashed a handful of wedding cake into my face. Frosting filled my mouth, my nose, my dignity, while a few guests laughed, unsure if they were supposed to. But my daughter, Emily, she didn't laugh. She froze. And then, just as I wiped the sweetness from my eyes, the music cut off. A voice came through the speakers, calm, firm, and impossible to ignore. No one leaves the ballroom. That was the moment everything stopped, and the truth began. If that moment already made your stomach turn, I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have walked out or stayed and faced it? Go ahead and like this video if you believe no mother should ever be humiliated like that. And if you've ever seen someone cross a line like this, share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Also tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because tonight, this story might hit closer to home than you expect. My name is Sarah Williams, and until that night, I believed I understood people. I spent over 30 years as a high school principal in Atlanta, Georgia, decades of reading faces, listening between words, and learning how to recognize trouble before it had a chance to grow. Teenagers taught me more about human nature than any book ever could. I had seen charm used as a weapon, silence used as control, and kindness mistaken for weakness more times than I could count. So when I tell you that something about Jason Reed never sat right with me, I want you to understand that feeling didn't come from nowhere. It came from experience, from instinct, and from a lifetime of learning what danger looks like when it dresses itself up as something harmless. But before Jason ever entered our lives, there was just me and my daughter, Emily. Emily was my miracle. I had her later in life, after years of thinking motherhood might never happen for me. When my husband, David, passed away 12 years ago, Emily was still in college, bright-driven and carrying more grief than any young woman should have to bear. Losing him nearly broke both of us, but we rebuilt, slowly, carefully. We became each other's anchor in a world that suddenly felt unsteady. I poured everything I had into making sure she never felt alone, and she, in her own quiet way, gave me a reason to keep going when I wasn't sure I had the strength. We weren't just mother and daughter. We were a team. So when Emily told me about Jason, I wanted more than anything to like him. I remember the first time I met him. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and bright, the kind of Georgia day that makes everything feel a little softer. Emily invited me over to her apartment for lunch, and she sounded different on the phone. Lighter, excited, hopeful. When Jason opened the door, he smiled in a way that would have disarmed most people instantly. Tall, well-dressed. Confident without being loud, at least on the surface. He had that polished energy, the kind that makes you think he knows exactly who he is and where he's going. "Mrs. Williams," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I've heard so much about you." That sentence alone could have meant anything, but it was the way he said it, measured, careful, as if he already knew what I needed to hear. Lunch went smoothly enough. Jason was attentive, asked polite questions about my career, and spoke passionately about his work in financial consulting, though when I asked for specifics, his answers stayed just vague enough to avoid clarity. It was subtle, so subtle that if I hadn't spent decades listening to half-truths dressed as full ones, I might have missed it entirely. Emily, of course, didn't see any of that. She was glowing, laughing at his jokes, reaching for his hand without thinking, looking at him, the way I once looked at my husband, like the world made more sense with him in it. And that mattered to me. So I told myself to be open, to give him a chance. Over the next few months, Jason became a regular presence in our lives. Holidays, dinners, small family gatherings. He fit in easily, adapting himself to whatever space he walked into. With my friends, he was charming. With neighbors, respectful. With Emily, attentive in a way that felt almost studied. That was the first word that came to mind. Studied, like he had learned how to be exactly what people expected. But then there were the moments in between, the ones no one else seemed to notice. A flicker of irritation when Emily interrupted him, A glance, quick, almost invisible, when someone mentioned finances or property. The way he would go quiet when conversations drifted toward independence boundaries or long-term planning that didn't center him. None of it was enough to accuse him of anything, but it was enough to make me watch. And I did. Carefully. The first time something truly unsettled me happened during a small dinner at my house. Nothing formal, just the three of us sitting around the table I had shared with my husband for years. We were talking about Emily's work. She's a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized firm, and how quickly she had been moving up. I was proud of her. I said so. Jason smiled, but there was something tight in it. She works hard, he said. But once we're married, things might shift a little. Priorities change. Emily laughed, lightly brushing it off. Jason, we've talked about this. I'm not giving up my career. Of course not, he replied quickly, too quickly. I just mean, we'll make decisions together. It sounded reasonable. It always did. But I noticed how he said together. Not like a partnership, more like an expectation. Later that evening, as I walked them to the door, Jason turned to me and said something that at the time felt small enough to ignore. You've done a great job with her, he said. Really? But at some point, you've got to let her go right. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes didn't. And in that moment, something in my chest tightened, because it didn't sound like a suggestion. It sounded like a warning. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was what letting go looked like, that maybe I was the one who needed to adjust. After all, Emily was an adult. She deserved to build her own life, make her own choices, even mistakes. That's what I had always believed. But belief and instinct are not the same thing. And my instinct refused to quiet down. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing patterns. Jason had a way of steering conversations, subtly redirecting them whenever they drifted into areas he didn't like. He would joke about my old-fashioned views, laugh it off, and somehow leave me feeling dismissed without ever raising his voice. Emily began canceling our weekly lunches. At first, she had valid reasons, work deadlines, travel exhaustion. Then the reasons became vaguer. We're busy, we've got a lot going on, we'll catch up soon, Mom. And when we did speak, Jason was often nearby, not always talking, just there, listening, watching. It wasn't control in the obvious sense. It was something quieter, more patient, and far more dangerous. One evening, I sat alone in my living room staring at a photo of Emily and David from years ago, her hand in his, both of them laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. I realized with a heaviness I couldn't shake that somewhere along the way, I had stopped recognizing the life my daughter was building. And worse, I wasn't sure she recognized it either. That was the moment I stopped trying to convince myself everything was fine. That was the moment I started paying attention for real. Because whatever Jason Reed was, he wasn't just a man in love with my daughter. And deep down, I think I already knew he was planning something. I just didn't know how far he was willing to go. If there's one thing I learned in my years as a principal, it's this: real trouble rarely announces itself. It doesn't come crashing through the door. It settles in quietly, rearranges things, and makes you question your own instincts before you ever question it. That's exactly how Jason Reed began to move into my daughter's life. And before I knew it, I wasn't just watching him anymore. I was being edged out. At first, it showed up in small, almost forgettable ways. Wedding planning, for example. Emily had always dreamed of a beautiful but intimate ceremony, something elegant, warm, and deeply personal. She used to talk about it when she was younger, sitting at the kitchen table with magazines spread out, pointing at dresses she loved, and laughing about how she'd probably cry before she made it down the aisle. So when she got engaged, I assumed I would be part of that process. Not in a controlling way, just present, helping, supporting, sharing that moment with her. But Jason had other ideas. I think we should keep things streamlined, he said during one of our early planning discussions. We were sitting in a downtown cafe, the kind with overpriced coffee and polished marble tables. Emily was beside him, scrolling through venue options on her phone, while I tried to keep up with the conversation. Weddings can get chaotic when too many people are involved. Jason continued stirring his drink slowly. It's better if we just make decisions quickly and move forward. Emily nodded. That makes sense. I smiled politely. Of course. I just thought maybe I could help with a few things. I've been to enough weddings to know what works and what doesn't." Jason chuckled, not loudly, just enough to make it clear he found that amusing. "I'm sure you have," he said. "But weddings today are a little different than they used to be." There it was again. That tone. That soft, dismissive edge wrapped in politeness. Emily didn't react. Or maybe she chose not to. Either way, the message was clear. I wasn't needed. From that point on, decisions started happening without me. Venues were booked. Caterers were chosen. Guest lists were finalized. And I would find out about it afterward, usually through a quick text or a rushed phone call. "Mom, we already handled it, but I know you'll love it." That sentence became a pattern. I told myself to accept it, to step back, to let my daughter build her life the way she wanted. But then the comments started, and those were harder to ignore. It began with jokes, always jokes. At a small dinner with Jason's friends, someone asked about Emily's upbringing. Before I could answer, Jason leaned back in his chair and said, "Oh, Sarah ran a tight ship. Emily practically grew up in a boot camp." The table laughed. Emily smiled awkwardly. "It wasn't that bad." "I'm kidding," Jason added quickly, raising his hands. "But seriously, she's very structured." He said that word like it was a flaw, like discipline, consistency, and strength were things to apologize for. I let it slide, but I noticed, because each joke carried something underneath it, a subtle rewriting of who I was in Emily's life. Another time, during a visit to their apartment, I complimented a piece of artwork Emily had chosen for the living room. "It's beautiful," I said. "You've always had an eye for design." Jason glanced at it and shrugged. "Yeah, she's got good taste," he said. "I've been helping her refine it." Emily didn't correct him. She just smiled, and something in me tightened again. Because I knew my daughter. I knew her taste, her instincts, her independence, and I was watching someone slowly take credit for pieces of her identity while she let him. But the moment that truly shifted everything, the moment I couldn't ignore anymore, came unexpectedly. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had stopped by Emily's apartment without calling first a habit she had never minded before. I still had a spare key, something she insisted I keep just in case. When I walked in, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I called her name, but there was no answer. I was about to leave when I heard Jason's voice from the bedroom. Low, focused. He was on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but something in his tone made me stop. "I'm telling you, once the wedding's done, everything lines up," he said. I stood still, barely breathing. There was a pause, then he continued. "No, she doesn't fully get it yet, but she will. It's not like she has a choice once things are combined." My heart started pounding. Combined. "What about the mother?" the voice on the other end must have asked, because Jason let out a short, humorless laugh. "She's cautious," he said, "but she's not going to be a problem for long. Not going to be a problem." The words echoed in my head like a warning bell. I should have walked away. I should have made noise, let him know I was there, but I couldn't. I needed to hear more. "I've already started laying the groundwork," Jason continued. "Finances, influence, all of it. Emily trusts me. That's the key." Another pause. Then softer, colder. "Once we're married, everything shifts." There it was again. That sentence. But this time it wasn't wrapped in politeness. It was stripped down to its truth. I stepped back quietly, my hand trembling as I reached for the door. I left without letting him know I had been there. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Because in that moment, everything I had been feeling, the unease, the doubt, the quiet alarms in my mind, they all clicked into place. This wasn't about personality differences. It wasn't about generational gaps. And it certainly wasn't about me letting go. This was something else. Something calculated. Something deliberate. Jason wasn't just building a life with my daughter. He was positioning himself inside it. Carefully, strategically. And whatever he believed was waiting on the other side of that marriage, he was willing to manipulate, isolate, and diminish anyone who stood in his way to get it, including me. That night, I sat alone in my living room again, the same photo of Emily and her father resting in my hands. I stared at it for a long time, long enough to feel the weight of what I was about to do, because from that moment on, I had a choice. I could confront him immediately. Risk pushing Emily further into his arms, making myself look paranoid and controlling. Or I could wait, watch, and gather the kind of truth that couldn't be denied. It wasn't an easy decision. No mother wants to stand still while her child walks toward danger, but I knew something Jason didn't. I knew my daughter's heart, and I knew that if I was going to reach her, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. And as much as it terrified me to admit it, I had a feeling Jason Reed was going to give me exactly that. There are moments in life when the past stops being something you remember and becomes something you must finally use. For me, that moment came the night I realized Jason Reed wasn't just circling my daughter's life, he was circling something else entirely, something he didn't fully understand, but something he clearly believed would be his. My late husband, David Williams, was a careful man. Not paranoid, not controlling, just thoughtful in a way that most people overlook until it's too late. He built his success over decades in commercial real estate, but more importantly, he built it with discipline. Every contract, every investment, every decision was made with long-term consequences in mind. And when he got sick, he didn't panic. He prepared. What most people didn't know, what even Emily didn't fully understand, was that David had established a private family trust years before he passed. Not just as a way to transfer wealth, but as a way to protect it. Protect it from instability, from impulsive decisions, and most importantly, from the wrong people. At the time, I didn't question the level of detail he put into it. I trusted him, and after he was gone, I trusted the system he left behind. But sitting in my living room that night, Jason's words still echoing in my mind once we're married, everything shifts. I realized something with chilling clarity. Jason thought he understood what he was walking into. He didn't. The next morning, I called the only person who knew the full structure of the trust, Denise Carter. Denise had been our family attorney for nearly 20 years. Sharp, composed, and impossible to intimidate, she was the kind of woman who didn't waste words and didn't make mistakes. When she answered the phone, her voice was steady as always. "Sarah, it's been a while. Is everything all right?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. "No," I said quietly. "It's not. We met that afternoon at our office downtown, a clean, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Denise greeted me with a firm handshake and guided me into her private conference room. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She waited. So I told her everything. Jason's behavior, the subtle control, the financial curiosity, and finally, what I overheard. Denise listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, the room fell silent for a moment. Then she leaned back slightly, folding her hands on the table. "Do you believe your daughter is in danger?" she asked. The question landed heavier than I expected. "Yes," I said. "Not physically, but yes." Denise nodded once. "Then we need to be very careful about what we do next." She turned her laptop toward me and pulled up a set of documents I hadn't looked at in years. "The Williams Family Trust," she said. "As your husband designed it, the majority of the assets are protected under conditional release." I frowned slightly. "Conditional." "Yes," she said. "Emily is the primary beneficiary, but full access is not automatic upon marriage. There are safeguards." I felt a flicker of relief. What kind of safeguards? Denise's eyes met mine. If there is credible evidence of coercion, fraud, or financial manipulation by a spouse, access to those assets can be delayed, restricted, or even denied entirely. For the first time since this all began, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not uncertainty, clarity. "So Jason can't just marry into it?" I asked. "No," Denise said firmly. "Not without scrutiny, not without oversight, and certainly not if we have grounds to challenge his intentions." I exhaled slowly, tension easing just enough to think clearly again. "But suspicion isn't enough, is it?" Denise shook her head. "No, we need proof. Documented behavior, statements, patterns that demonstrate intent. Proof." The word echoed in my mind. It was exactly what I had been thinking the night before. "I can get that," I said quietly. Denise studied me for a moment. "Sarah, this will not be easy," she said. "If you move forward with this, you need to understand something." I looked at her. "You may have to let things play out longer than you're comfortable with." My chest tightened. "You mean, let him keep going?" "To a point," she said. "We don't intervene too early. If we do, he can deny everything, reposition himself as the victim, and isolate your daughter further. But if we wait, if we document carefully, we can build something undeniable." I knew she was right. I hated that she was right, because every instinct I had as a mother told me to stop this immediately, to pull Emily out, to confront Jason and expose him. But instinct alone wouldn't save her. Evidence would. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. Denise nodded, then we start quietly. As I left her office that day, I felt the weight of what I had just agreed to settle over me. This wasn't just about suspicion anymore. This was strategy, and strategy requires patience. The next few weeks tested that patience more than I expected, because while I was preparing, Jason was accelerating. His interest in finances became more direct. He started asking Emily questions about her long-term plans, retirement investments, property ownership. Questions that sounded responsible on the surface, but always circled back to one thing: access, control. "Have you and your mom talked about long-term planning?" I overheard him ask one evening when I was visiting. Emily hesitated. "Not really." "Why, I just think it's important," he said casually. "Especially if we're building a future together. Transparency matters." Transparency. Another word that sounded good until you looked at how it was being used. Emily nodded slowly. "I can ask her." "No rush," Jason said quickly, "just something to think about." He smiled, and once again, no one else seemed to notice what I did, that the smile didn't reach his eyes. Around the same time, I met Jason's mother for the first time in a more personal setting, Linda Reed. She invited me to lunch, a gesture that seemed on the surface like an attempt to connect. She was polished, well-dressed, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly how to present yourself. "Sarah, I've heard so much about you," she said warmly as we sat down. There was that sentence again. "So much about you." I smiled politely. "I hope it was good." "Of course," she said with a soft laugh. "Jason speaks very highly of you." Something in her tone made me pause, not suspicious enough to call out, but not genuine enough to trust. We made small talk at first family, careers, wedding plans. Then gradually, she shifted the conversation. "You know, Linda said," stirring her coffee, "Jason has always been very driven." "I've noticed," I replied. "He knows what he wants," she continued, "and he's not afraid to go after it." There was pride in her voice, but also something else. Expectation. "I suppose that's a good quality," I said carefully. "It is," she said, "as long as the people around him understand that." Our eyes met, and for a brief moment the politeness dropped. Not completely, just enough. Enough for me to see it. She knew exactly who her son was, and she had no intention of stopping him. That realization settled deep in my chest, because it meant this wasn't just one man's behavior. It was a pattern, a learned one. As I drove home from that lunch, one thing became clear to me in a way it hadn't. Before, Jason Reed wasn't improvising. He was following a script he had rehearsed long before he ever met my daughter. And now, he was almost at the final act, the wedding. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my reflection staring back at me in the rearview mirror. He thought everything would shift once that day arrived. He thought he would win. But what Jason didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that every move he made from this point forward, I would be watching, recording, waiting. Because if he wanted to play this game to the end, then so would I. There is a particular kind of fear that only a mother understands. It isn't loud. It doesn't always show itself in panic or tears. Sometimes it sits quietly in your chest, growing heavier with every moment you realize your child is slipping just out of reach. That was the fear I carried in the weeks leading up to the wedding, because by then I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how to stop it without losing Emily completely. After my meeting with Denise, I became more careful, more observant, more intentional about every interaction I had with Jason. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was studying him. And the more I watched, the clearer his pattern became. Jason didn't push hard all at once. He applied pressure slowly, strategically, just enough to guide Emily in the direction he wanted, without making her feel like she was being controlled. It was subtle, and that made it dangerous. One evening, Emily invited me over for dinner. It had been a while since we spent time alone, and I held on to that invitation like something fragile. When I arrived, Jason was already there, of course. He greeted me with the same polished smile, the same controlled warmth. "Sarah," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Glad you could make it." His tone was pleasant, but I noticed something immediately. Emily looked tired, not physically exhausted in an obvious way, but drained in a way that sat behind her eyes. Her smile came a second too late. Her movements felt careful, measured, as if she were thinking before she acted. That wasn't my daughter, not the Emily I raised. We sat down to eat, and for a while everything felt almost normal. Conversation flowed. Jason talked about work, about new opportunities, though again the details remained frustratingly vague. Emily nodded along, occasionally adding something, but mostly letting him lead. I watched, I listened, and I waited. Then halfway through dinner, Jason set his fork down and leaned back in his chair. "Actually," he said casually, "there's something we wanted to talk to you about." My chest tightened slightly. I glanced at Emily. She didn't meet my eyes. "What is it?" I asked. Jason looked at her, giving a small, encouraging nod. Emily cleared her throat. "Well, Jason and I were thinking it might make sense to start combining some of our finances before the wedding." There it was. I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean by combining?" Jason leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "Nothing complicated," he said smoothly. "Just setting up a joint account, streamlining expenses, planning ahead. It's what couples do." His tone was calm, reasonable, almost rehearsed. "And whose idea was this?" I asked gently. Emily hesitated. "Mine too," she said quickly. "We both talked about it." I nodded slowly, though something in me tightened even further. "And what exactly would be going into this account?" I asked. Jason smiled slightly. "Our income savings, just to make things easier. Build a foundation, a foundation." The word echoed in my mind. I chose my next words carefully. Emily. I said softly, "Have you spoken to anyone about this? A financial advisor, maybe?" Her expression shifted, just slightly. "Why would I need to do that?" she asked. "It's just a big step," I said, "and it's always good to have a clear understanding before making decisions like that." Jason let out a quiet chuckle. "With all due respect, Sarah," he said, "we're not exactly doing anything unusual here." His voice was still polite, but there was an edge now, sharp, controlled. "I didn't say you were," I replied evenly. "I just want to make sure Emily is protected." There was a brief silence, then Jason tilted his head slightly, studying me. Protected from what he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. I met his gaze. "From making decisions she might not fully understand yet," I said calmly. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Irritation. Gone just as quickly as it appeared. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Mom, it's really not that serious," she said. "We're just planning ahead." I turned to her, softening my tone. "I know, sweetheart. I just want you to be careful, that's all." Jason leaned back again, crossing his arms loosely. "She is careful," he said, "and she trusts me." There it was, trust, used like a shield. I nodded once. "I'm glad she does," I said quietly, but inside I felt something colder settle into place, because trust in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. The conversation moved on after that, but the air had shifted. It was subtle, but it was there, and I could feel it in the way Emily avoided my eyes for the rest of the evening. In the way Jason watched me just a little more closely, as if he knew I wasn't convinced, as if he knew I was becoming a problem. Later that night, after I returned home, my phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Mom, I feel like you don't trust Jason." I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "I trust you," I typed. "That's why I'm careful." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. "I just wish you would support us," she replied. There it was. The distance, the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but real and growing. I set the phone down slowly, my chest heavy, because this was exactly what Denise had warned me about. If I pushed too hard too soon, I would lose her, and Jason would win without ever having to prove anything. The next piece of the puzzle came just a few days later, and it changed everything. I had stopped by Emily's apartment again this time with a small bag of groceries I knew she liked. It was a simple excuse, one that wouldn't raise suspicion. When I got there, the door was slightly open. I knocked softly. No answer. I stepped inside. Emily, I called. Still nothing. But then I heard voices. From the living room. Jason's voice. And someone else's. Male. I froze, instinctively stepping back into the hallway where I couldn't be seen. "I'm telling you it's already in motion," Jason was saying. My heart started pounding. "You're sure about the paperwork?" the other man asked. "Yeah," Jason replied. "She signed it. Didn't even question it." My breath caught. "Signed what that easy?" the man said, sounding impressed. Jason laughed. "Easier than you'd think. You just have to make it feel like her idea." My hands trembled, because now it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. "And the mom?" the man asked. Jason's tone shifted, colder. "She's getting in the way," he said, "but not for much longer." The same words, again. "Not for much longer." A chill ran through me. "What's your plan?" the man asked. There was a brief pause. Then Jason spoke quieter this time. "Public perception," he said. "You break someone down in front of people. They lose credibility. Influence disappears real fast after that." My stomach dropped. Public humiliation. My mind flashed unwanted sudden to the wedding, the guests, the attention, the vulnerability of that moment. And suddenly, something clicked into place. Something I hadn't fully understood before. Jason wasn't just trying to gain control behind closed doors. He was planning to take it openly, in front of everyone. I stepped back silently, my pulse racing as I made my way out of the apartment without being seen. Once I was in my car, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Because now, I knew. I knew what he was capable of. I knew what he was planning. And worst of all, I knew my daughter was already caught in it. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Not just emotionally, strategically, because now I didn't just need proof. I had it. Or at least, I had the beginning of it. And Jason Reed had just made one critical mistake. He thought no one was listening, but I was. And from that moment on, I wouldn't miss a single word. There's a difference between knowing something is wrong and knowing exactly how to fight it. By the time I left Emily's apartment that afternoon, my hands still trembling from what I had just overheard, I understood one thing with absolute certainty: Jason Reed wasn't guessing anymore. He had already made his move, and now so would I. I drove straight to Denise's office without calling ahead. For the first time since this all began, I didn't care about being composed or measured. I needed her to hear this every word, every detail while it was still fresh. When I walked in, her assistant barely had time to announce me before Denise looked up from her desk and immediately read the urgency in my face. "Sarah," she said, standing. "What happened?" I heard him. I said, "Everything." She didn't ask me to sit. She didn't interrupt. She simply closed her office door and gave me her full attention. And I told her every word Jason had said. The conversation about the paperwork. The casual way he admitted Emily had signed something without understanding it. And worst of all, the plan. Public perception. I repeated, my voice tight. He said if you break someone down in front of people, they lose credibility. Denise's expression hardened. "That's not just manipulation," she said quietly. "That's strategy." I nodded. "He's planning something at the wedding," I added. "I don't know exactly what, but he wants to humiliate me. Publicly. In front of everyone." Denise walked to the window, her arms folded as she looked out over the city. For a moment she said nothing. Then she turned back to me. "Do you have any recordings?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "I didn't have my phone out. I didn't expect to hear any of it." "That's all right," she said. "What you heard still matters. It gives us direction." Direction. I exhaled slowly. "So what do we do?" Denise stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "We build a case," she said, quietly, carefully. "And we let him reveal himself." I felt a flicker of frustration. "You want me to wait?" I asked. "After everything I just heard, I want you to win," she replied. That stopped me because she was right. This wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about ending it completely. "If we confront him now," Denise continued, "he'll deny everything. He'll twist it. And your daughter, already emotionally invested, may side with him. That's what people like him rely on." I closed my eyes briefly, because I knew she was right about that too. Emily trusted him, deeply. And trust once rooted doesn't disappear just because someone else points out danger. "So we let it play out," I said quietly. "To a point," Denise said. "But this time we control the environment." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" It means we prepare for the moment he thinks he has the most power, she said, and we take it away. The wedding, of course, that was his stage, which meant it could be ours too. Denise moved back to her desk and pulled out a legal pad, jotting down notes as she spoke. We need documentation, she said, audio if possible, written communication, anything that establishes intent, financial exploitation, coercion, manipulation. I can try, I said, but he's careful. They always are, she replied, until they're not. I thought about that, about Jason's confidence, the way he spoke when he thought no one was listening. He's getting comfortable, I said slowly. Denise nodded, and comfort leads to mistakes. She paused, then looked at me directly. There's something else we can do, she added. What we place someone on site at the wedding, she said. Not just security, someone trained to observe, document, and intervene if necessary. A private investigator, I asked. Exactly. The idea made my stomach tighten, but not with fear. With something else. Resolve. Do it, I said. Denise gave a small nod. I already have someone in mind. Over the next few days, everything began to shift. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone else could see, but behind the scenes, pieces were moving. Denise connected me with an off-duty detective named Marcus Hale, a quiet, observant man in his 40s, with a calm presence and sharp eyes that missed very little. We met once, briefly. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He just listened. I'll blend in, he said. Weddings are easy. People don't notice what they're not looking for. That gave me a strange kind of comfort, because Jason wasn't looking for someone like Marcus. He wasn't expecting resistance. He thought he was in control. Meanwhile, I adjusted my own behavior carefully. I stopped questioning Jason directly, stopped pushing, stopped giving him any reason to see me as an immediate threat. Instead, I smiled, listened, observed, and waited. It wasn't easy. Every instinct in me wanted to pull Emily aside, to shake her gently and make her see what I saw. But I couldn't. Not yet, because if I moved too soon, I would lose her, and Jason would walk away clean. So I played my role, the supportive mother, the one who was finally letting go, and for a while, it worked. Jason relaxed, not completely, but enough. I saw it in the way his tone softened slightly when he spoke to me, in the way he stopped watching me quite so closely, in the way he began speaking more freely around me, assuming I had stepped back. That assumption would cost him. Emily, however, Emily was harder to reach. The distance between us had settled into something quiet but heavy. We still spoke, still saw each other, but there was a layer there now, something unspoken, something fragile. One afternoon, as we sat together reviewing final wedding details, she looked up at me suddenly. "Mom," she said softly. "Yes. Are you okay with all of this?" The question caught me off guard, not because of what she asked, but because of how she asked it, carefully, almost nervously. I smiled gently. "Of course I am," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" She hesitated. "I just feel like things have been tense." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Weddings are stressful," I said softly. "For everyone." She searched my face as if trying to find something beneath the words. "Jason says you don't really trust him," she added quietly. There it was, his voice, still present even when he wasn't. I chose my words carefully. "I trust you," I said. Her expression softened slightly, but only slightly. "I just want you to be happy," I continued. "And safe," she nodded. "I am," she said. But something in her eyes, something didn't match, and I knew in that moment that part of her wasn't entirely convinced. Not of me, not of him, just uncertain. That uncertainty was my only window, and I held on to it. Because deep down, beneath everything Jason had built around her, my daughter was still there, still thinking, still feeling, still capable of seeing the truth. I just had to make sure that when the moment came, when everything was finally exposed, she would be able to recognize it. The wedding was only days away now. Everything was set. The venue, the guests, the carefully constructed illusion Jason believed he controlled. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly see coming, was that the stage he had prepared for his victory was about to become the place where everything he built would collapse. And this time, he wouldn't be the one in control. In my experience, the closer you get to a breaking point, the quieter everything becomes. Not peaceful, not calm, just tight. Like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to snap. That was the feeling in the final days before the wedding. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The venue was confirmed, the dress was fitted. The guest list finalized. Emily sent me pictures of floral arrangements and table settings, asking for my opinion again, as if trying in her own way to rebuild a bridge she wasn't ready to fully cross. I answered every message with warmth, carefully measured warmth, enough to reassure her, not enough to alert him, because Jason was still watching. Even when he pretended not to be, the shift in him was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. He had stopped trying to win me over. That effort, polished smile's rehearsed charm was gone. In its place was something colder, more certain, like a man who believed he was already standing at the finish line. The first time I truly saw that change up close was during the final rehearsal dinner. It was held at a private room in an upscale restaurant in downtown Atlanta. Low lighting, soft music, carefully curated elegance. Everything designed to reflect control, refinement, and success. Jason's world. Emily sat beside him, radiant in a simple cream dress, her smile present but not quite reaching her eyes. She laughed when expected, nodded at the right moments, played her role perfectly. But I knew her, and I could see the strain. Jason, on the other hand, seemed energized, confident in a way that bordered on arrogant. He moved through the room like someone who owned it, not just the space, but the people inside it. Shaking hands, offering jokes, accepting compliments with a modesty that felt practiced. And then there were the comments, small, sharp, delivered with a smile. At one point, someone at the table asked how Emily had managed such a beautiful event. Before she could answer, Jason spoke. "Well, she had a good foundation," he said, glancing briefly in my direction. "But we've definitely modernized things." A few people chuckled. Emily gave a polite smile. I said nothing. Because I was starting to understand something important. Jason wasn't just trying to diminish me privately anymore. He was testing it, publicly, measuring how people reacted, seeing how far he could go without consequences. Later that evening, as dessert was being served, he leaned slightly closer to me across the table. "Big day tomorrow," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Yes," I replied calmly. "Exciting," he added. I met his gaze. "Very." There was a pause. Then just for a second, the mask slipped. Not completely, just enough. Enough for me to see the satisfaction underneath. "You've handled everything, Sia." "Pretty well," he said. "I'll give you that." It sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't. It was an evaluation. Like I'd passed some kind of test. I held his gaze a moment longer. "I always do," I said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Then it was gone. The smile returned, and he leaned back in his chair as if the moment had never happened. But it had, and it told me everything I needed to know. He was ready. The next morning, the house was filled with movement. Hairstylists, makeup artists, bridesmaids, voices overlapping laughter, rising and falling in waves. The energy was bright, almost overwhelming. Emily sat in front of the mirror, her reflection glowing in soft, natural light. Her wedding dress hung nearby, pristine and untouched, waiting for its moment. I stood behind her, watching quietly. "You look beautiful," I said. She smiled. "Thank you, Mom." Our eyes met in the mirror. For a second, it felt like before, like nothing had changed. Then she looked down, adjusting a bracelet on her wrist. "Jason's been stressed," she said softly. I didn't react immediately. "Weddings do that," I replied. She nodded. "He just wants everything to be perfect, perfect." The words settled between us, heavy. "Perfection is a lot of pressure," I said gently. She gave a small, almost tired laugh. "Tell me about it." There was something in her tone, something honest. And for a moment, I wondered if she was closer to seeing the truth than I realized. But then one of the bridesmaids called her name, pulling her attention away. And just like that, the moment was gone. By the time we arrived at the venue, everything was in place. The ballroom was stunning. Soft white linens, gold accents, cascading floral arrangements, every detail carefully chosen to create an atmosphere of elegance and celebration. Guests began to arrive, filling the space with conversation and anticipation. I moved through the room, slowly greeting familiar faces, accepting hugs, answering polite questions. And all the while, I watched. Denise arrived shortly after, dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit. She gave me a small nod as she approached, nothing obvious, nothing that would draw attention. "He's here," she murmured quietly. "I know," I replied, "and Marcus is in position." I glanced toward the far side of the room where a man I barely recognized stood near the bar, blending effortlessly into the crowd. Good. Everything was in place. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Emily walked down the aisle, her face radiant, her steps steady, despite everything I knew she was carrying inside. Jason stood waiting, his expression carefully composed, his posture confident. To anyone watching, it was perfect. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, applause filled the room. And just like that, they were married. I felt a sharp twist in my chest, because even knowing what I knew, there was still a part of me that wished things were different. That wished this moment was real in the way it should have been. But reality doesn't bend for wishes. And truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. The reception began soon after. Music, laughter, champagne glasses raised in celebration. Jason moved through it all with ease, playing his role flawlessly. But I could see it now. The anticipation, the subtle tension beneath his movements. He was waiting for something, and I had a feeling I knew exactly what. As the evening went on, the energy shifted slightly. Drinks were poured more freely, voices grew louder, the formal structure of the event began to loosen. And then, the announcement came. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the cake cutting." The room responded with cheers and applause. All eyes turned toward the center of the ballroom where the wedding cake stood tall, elegant, and perfectly crafted. I felt my pulse quicken, not from nerves, from certainty. This was it. This was the moment he had been building toward. Jason took Emily's hand, guiding her toward the cake with a confident smile. She followed, her expression soft but slightly uncertain. Guests gathered around, phones raised, ready to capture the moment. I stood just a few feet away, watching, waiting, because deep down, I already knew. Whatever Jason Reed was about to do, he believed it would secure his control, his dominance, his victory. But what he didn't understand, what he couldn't see, was that this moment, this exact moment he had planned so carefully, was also the one that would destroy him. There is a moment just before something irreversible happens when the world seems to sharpen. Every sound becomes clearer. Every movement feels slower. Every instinct rises to the surface at once. As I stood there just a few feet from that towering wedding cake, I felt it, that moment. Jason's hand rested lightly on Emily's waist as he guided her forward. To everyone else, it looked affectionate, supportive, the kind of gesture a new husband makes without thinking. But I saw the tension in his fingers, the control. Emily stepped beside him, smiling as the photographer adjusted his position, calling out directions with cheerful authority. "All right, you two hold the knife together." "Perfect, just like that. Beautiful." The guests gathered closer, laughter and excitement rippling through the room. Phones lifted into the air, flashes ready to capture what was supposed to be a light-hearted tradition. I could feel Denise somewhere behind me, Marcus too, invisible to everyone else, but present, ready. Jason reached for the knife, placing Emily's hand over his. For a brief second, she hesitated, just a fraction, but enough for me to notice. "Ready?" he asked her. His voice was soft, warm, convincing. Emily nodded, ready. They pressed the knife into the cake together, slicing through the first layer as applause broke out around them. "Now feed each other," someone called. A chorus of agreement followed. "Yeah, don't be shy," Jason laughed, that easy, charming laugh that had fooled so many people. He scooped a small piece of cake onto his fingers, turning toward Emily. For a moment, everything seemed normal. He lifted the cake gently to her lips, smiling as she took a bite. A few cheers erupted. Cameras clicked. Emily laughed, wiping a bit of frosting from the corner of her mouth, and then she reached for her own piece, small, delicate. She raised it toward him, but Jason didn't lean forward. Instead, he turned, slowly, deliberately, until he was facing me. Time slowed. My breath caught in my chest. For 1 second, our eyes locked, and in that second, I saw it. Not humor, not playfulness, not celebration. Control, calculation, victory. Before I could move, before I could even fully process what was happening, Jason stepped forward and slammed the cake into my face. Hard. Cold frosting exploded across my cheeks, my eyes, my mouth. The force of it snapped my head back slightly, my body instinctively stumbling half a step. Gasps, then laughter, scattered at first, uncertain. People trying to decide if this was part of the show, if they were supposed to laugh, if this was normal. But it wasn't normal, and deep down, they knew it. I stood there frozen, the sweetness of the cake clinging to my skin, the smell of sugar thick in the air. Humiliation washed over me in a wave so sharp it almost made me dizzy, not just because of what he had done, but because of how he had done it. Calculated, public, deliberate. Exactly as he had described. Public perception, he had said. Break someone down in front of people. I could hear the echo of his voice in my mind as I slowly lifted a hand, wiping frosting from my eyes. The room wavered for a second, not from weakness, from the sheer weight of the moment. And then I saw her, Emily. She wasn't laughing, she wasn't smiling, she was staring at Jason. Her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked very close to fear. "Jason, what are you doing?" she whispered. Her voice didn't carry far, but I heard it, and so did he. Jason turned back to her, his expression shifting instantly back into that charming, easy smile. "Relax," he said lightly. "It's just a joke, a joke." The word hung in the air, thin, hollow, because no one was laughing anymore. Not really. The energy in the room had changed. Completely. The laughter that had started out of confusion faded, quickly replaced by something else. Discomfort, unease, recognition. People were looking at each other now. Not at me, not at him, at each other, as if silently asking, did that just happen? Was that? Okay, Jason seemed to feel it, just for a moment. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but then he recovered, shrugging casually, as if nothing had happened. "Come on," he said, raising his hand slightly. "You've never seen a cake smash before." A few weak chuckles followed, but they didn't last, because something had already shifted too far. And then it happened. A sharp, sudden silence cut through the room. The music stopped, mid-song, just stopped. The abruptness of it made several people turn instinctively toward the sound system. Jason frowned slightly. "What the—" And then the microphone came alive, a soft click, followed by a voice. Calm, clear, unmistakably controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, "we need everyone to remain where they are." The room froze, completely. No one leaves the ballroom. A ripple of confusion spread instantly. People turned, whispered, looked toward the stage, toward the speakers, toward anything that might explain what was happening. Jason's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The confidence that had filled him moments before faltered. "What is this?" he said, his voice sharper now. Emily stepped back from him, her eyes darting around the room. "Jason, what's going on?" she asked, but he didn't answer. Because for the first time that night, he didn't know. I stood there still wiping the last traces of cake from my face, my heart pounding, but not from fear anymore, from something else, something steady, something certain. Because I knew that voice, and I knew exactly what was coming next. Denise Carter stepped forward, out of the crowd, calm, composed, unshaken. Her presence alone seemed to pull the room into a deeper silence. Jason's eyes locked onto her. Recognition flashed across his face. Then confusion. Then something darker. "What is this?" he demanded again. Denise didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "This," she said evenly, "is where we stop pretending." A murmur moved through the guests. Confusion turning into attention. Attention turning into tension. Emily looked between them, her breathing uneven. "Mom," she said, her voice small. I turned to her slowly, and for the first time since the cake hit my face, I spoke. "It's all right," I said gently, but my eyes didn't leave Jason, because this was the moment everything changed, the moment he thought he had won, the moment he believed he had taken control in front of everyone who mattered, and now it was the moment that control slipped through his fingers, completely. Because what Jason Reed didn't understand, what he never saw coming, was that the humiliation he planned for me was only the beginning. There is a kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room. It takes control of it. That was the silence that followed Denise's voice. Not the soft, uncertain quiet from before. This was different, heavier, intentional. Every conversation stopped. Every glass paused mid-air. Even the waitstaff froze where they stood. Trays balanced carefully as if any sudden movement might shatter something invisible holding the room together. Jason Reed, for the first time since I had known him, looked unsure. Not afraid, not yet, but uncertain. And for a man like him, that was the beginning of everything unraveling. "What is this?" he asked again, louder this time. Denise stepped forward into the center of the room, her posture straight, her presence unshakable. "This is a formal notice," she said calmly, "that certain legal concerns have been raised regarding financial conduct, coercion, and intent involving this marriage." The words hit the room like a drop of cold water, sharp, immediate, confusing. A ripple of murmurs spread among the guests. "What does that mean? Is this real? Is this part of the wedding?" Emily's face drained of color. "Mom," she said again, her voice trembling now. "What is she talking about?" I took a step toward her, my heart tightening at the fear in her eyes. "Just stay where you are," I said gently. "Please." Jason let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "You're seriously doing this?" "Here." He turned toward the guests, spreading his hands, as if appealing to their common sense. "I don't know what this is about, but clearly there's been some kind of misunderstanding." There it was, the pivot, the performance. He wasn't addressing Denise. He was addressing the room, shaping perception, controlling the narrative, exactly as he had planned. Only now, he was on the wrong side of it. Denise didn't react. "If you'll allow me to continue," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension, "we have reason to believe that Mr. Jason Reed has engaged in a pattern of behavior intended to manipulate financial access through this marriage." A louder wave of murmurs followed. Jason's smile tightened. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "You better be careful with what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Denise replied. "I'm stating facts supported by evidence. Evidence." The word landed like a weight. Emily took a small step back, her eyes flickering between Jason and Denise. "Jason," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason turned to her, immediately softening his expression. "Emily, don't listen to this," he said gently. "This is exactly what I told you about your mother doesn't trust me. She's trying to control the situation. Control." He was moving fast now, trying to reframe everything. But this time he wasn't the only one prepared. Denise nodded slightly toward the far side of the room, and that's when I saw him move. Marcus Hale, calm, unhurried. He stepped forward, holding something small in his hand, a recording device connected discreetly to the venue's audio system. Jason's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" he demanded. Marcus didn't answer. He simply handed the device to Denise. She turned back to the microphone. "This recording," she said, "was obtained earlier this week and has been verified for authenticity." Jason's expression shifted again. A flicker, quick, almost invisible. But I saw it, and in that moment I knew. He knew what was coming. Emily's voice shook as she spoke, a recording of what she asked. Denise didn't look at her. She looked at Jason. Then she pressed play. At first there was only static, a faint crackle. Then his voice, clear, unmistakable. "I'm telling you, it's already in motion." The room went completely still. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Jason's face went pale. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for the truth to begin surfacing. "You're sure about the paperwork?" another voice asked. "Yeah," Jason replied in the recording. "She signed it. Didn't even question it." A sharp gasp came from somewhere in the crowd. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered, but the recording continued. "That easy," the other man said. Jason laughed. "Easier than you'd think. You just have to make it feel like her idea." The words cut through the room like a blade, clean, precise, irrefutable. Emily staggered back slightly, her knees buckling just enough for me to instinctively move toward her. But she didn't fall. She just stood there, frozen, listening, because there was more. "There's something else," Denise said quietly, and she let the recording continue. "What about the mother?" the other voice asked. Jason's tone shifted, colder, dismissive. "She's getting in the way," he said, but not for much longer. A wave of shock moved through the guests. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" But Jason's voice didn't stop. "What's your plan?" the man asked. There was a pause. "Then public perception," Jason said. I felt my chest tighten, because I knew what was coming. You break someone down in front of people. He continued, they lose credibility. Influence disappears real fast after that. The silence that followed was absolute. No whispers, no movement, nothing. Just the weight of truth settling over every single person in that room. Emily's breathing became uneven, shallow. "Jason," she said, her voice cracking, "tell me that's not real." He didn't answer immediately. For the first time since I'd known him. He hesitated, and that hesitation, that single moment of silence said more than anything he could have. "This is taken out of context," he said finally, his voice sharper now. "You don't know what that conversation was about." Denise tilted her head slightly. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain it," she said. Jason's eyes darted briefly across the room, calculating, searching for an angle, an escape, but there wasn't one. Not this time. Emily took another step back, away from him. "Did I sign something?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Jason, did I sign something I didn't understand?" He reached for her. "Emily, listen to me." She flinched. The movement was small, barely noticeable, but it changed everything. Because now, everyone saw it. The distance, the doubt, the crack in the illusion. And Jason knew it. His expression shifted again, this time not into charm, not into control, but into something far more dangerous. Frustration. "Are you really going to believe this?" he snapped, his voice rising. "After everything we've built, everything we've built." The words sounded hollow now, because whatever he thought he had built was collapsing, right in front of him, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I stepped forward then. Finally, standing beside my daughter, not as a spectator, not as a silent witness, but as her mother. "You don't have to believe me," I said softly to Emily. "You just have to listen." She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears, confusion, pain, and something else, something fragile, awakening, because for the first time she wasn't just hearing Jason's voice. She was hearing the truth, and that truth was only beginning to unfold. If you've ever watched something fall apart in real time, you know it doesn't happen all at once. It fractures, piece by piece. And the hardest part isn't the noise, it's the moment you realize there's no putting it back together. That was the moment we were standing in. Emily's hand trembled in mine, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the crowded ballroom. Her eyes moved between me, Jason, and Denise, searching for something to hold onto, but there was nothing left to hold. Jason, however, wasn't finished. Men like him rarely are. "This is insane," he said, running a hand through his hair, as if trying to collect himself. "You're playing a recording from a private conversation and acting like it proves something. It doesn't." His voice had changed. The smooth confidence was cracking. Not gone, but strained. Denise didn't react to his tone. "Then let's remove any doubt," she said calmly. She nodded slightly toward Marcus again, and this time. He stepped forward, holding a slim folder. Jason's eyes followed the movement, suspicion sharpening his expression. "What is that?" he asked. "Documentation," Denise replied. She took the folder, opening it with deliberate precision before turning slightly so both Jason and Emily could see. "These are copies of financial documents signed within the last 3 weeks," she said. "Documents authorizing preliminary access to shared financial planning structures, under the assumption of marital consolidation." Emily frowned, confusion deepening. "I don't understand," she said. "I didn't authorize anything like that." Denise's voice softened slightly, though her composure remained intact. "You signed them, Emily," she said. "But based on the language used and the timing, it's clear the full implications were not explained to you." Emily shook her head slowly. "No. Jason said those were just basic planning forms, nothing official." Jason stepped forward quickly. "That's exactly what they were," he said, his tone sharpening. "This is being blown completely out of proportion." Denise lifted one page, pointing to a section near the bottom. "Clause 4B," she said. "This provision allows for shared access review to pre-existing financial structures once the marriage is legally recognized." Jason's jaw tightened. "That's standard language," he snapped. "Not when paired with this," Denise replied, flipping to another page. "And this," she added, revealing a third. I watched Jason carefully, because this was the moment when someone like him decides whether to keep pretending or to fight. Emily's voice was barely steady. "Jason, why didn't you explain this to me?" He turned to her immediately, stepping closer, lowering his voice again, trying to regain control. "I did explain it," he said softly. "You're just overwhelmed right now. That's all this is." But she didn't relax. She didn't soften. For the first time, she questioned him. "No," she said, her voice shaking. "You said it was just paperwork. You said it didn't matter. It doesn't—" He insisted quickly. "Not like this. Not the way they're making it sound." Denise closed the folder slowly. "Then perhaps we should move beyond paperwork," she said. The room seemed to tighten again, because everyone could feel it. Something bigger was coming. Jason exhaled sharply. "You've made your point," he said. "Now I think this little performance is over." "Not yet," Denise replied, and then she did something simple, something devastating. She looked directly at him. "Do you have any outstanding debts, Mr. Reed?" The question landed like a strike. Jason blinked once, caught off guard. "That's none of your business," he said quickly. "It becomes our business," Denise replied, "when those debts intersect with intent to access protected financial assets through marriage." A murmur spread through the room again. Emily's head turned sharply toward him. "Jason," she said. He hesitated again. And that hesitation, that tiny crack was widening. "I've had business challenges," he said finally. "Like anyone else." "How much?" Denise asked. Jason's eyes narrowed. "I'm not discussing that here." Denise didn't raise her voice. "Approximately $280,000 in unresolved liabilities," she said. The number hit the room like a shockwave. Gasps, whispers. Emily's face went completely still. "No," she whispered. Jason's expression hardened instantly. "You've been digging into my personal records," he snapped. "We've been verifying patterns," Denise corrected. Emily took a step back, away from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It's not like that," Jason said quickly. "I was handling it. I didn't want to worry you." "By not telling me," she said. Her voice wasn't just hurt now. It was changing, becoming sharper, more aware. Jason stepped toward her again. "Emily, listen to me. This doesn't change anything between us," but she shook her head. "Yes, it does," she said, and in that moment I saw it. The shift, the first real break in his hold over her. Jason saw it too, and something in him snapped. Not completely, but enough. "You're really gonna do this," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Right here." In front of everyone, his eyes flicked toward me then. And the blame followed. "This is what she wanted," he said, pointing at me. "She never liked me. She's been waiting for a chance to tear this apart." I didn't react immediately, because I had expected this. Denise had warned me. When the control slips, they attack. Emily looked at me, her expression torn. "Mom," she said. I stepped forward slowly, meeting her eyes. "I didn't want this," I said softly. And that was the truth. I wanted to be wrong. Her face crumpled slightly, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. I continued, and I couldn't ignore what he said. Jason let out a sharp laugh. "So now we're trusting secret recordings over real life," he said. "Over everything we've built together." Emily turned back to him, and this time, she didn't hesitate. "You built it on lies," she said. The words hung in the air, final, unsteady, but real. Jason stared at her, and for a second, he looked almost surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to say it, as if he had underestimated her. And that was his biggest mistake, because the moment she said those words, everything changed, not just for him, for her, for us, for the entire room watching it unfold. Jason's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice low now, controlled, dangerous. Emily didn't step back, not this time. "I know you lied to me," she said. "I know you hid things from me, and I know you planned something tonight." Silence. Jason didn't answer, because he couldn't, not without confirming everything. Denise stepped forward again. "There is one more matter to address," she said. Jason closed his eyes briefly, like a man bracing for impact. "Of course there is," he muttered. Denise's voice remained steady. "Given the evidence presented, recordings, documentation, financial patterns, we are formally initiating a protective review of all trust-related assets connected to the Williams estate." Jason's eyes snapped open. "And as of this moment," she continued, "you have no legal access to any of it." There it was. The final blow, not emotional, not personal, absolute, legal, unchangeable. Jason stood there completely still. The room waited. watching, because everyone could feel it. This was the moment he lost, not just the argument, not just the image, everything. And for the first time since this all began, Jason Reed had nothing left to hide behind. When the illusion finally breaks, it doesn't shatter quietly. It collapses. Loud, messy, uncontainable. That's exactly what happened in that ballroom. For a few seconds after Denise's final statement, no one moved. It was as if the entire room had been suspended in time, every guest holding their breath, waiting for anyone to say something that could make sense of what they had just witnessed. But there was no explanation that could fix this, because the truth had already done its damage. Jason stood at the center of it all, his expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and calculation. I could almost see his mind working, searching for a way out, a version of events he could twist, a final move he could make to regain control. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. "This is unbelievable," he said finally, his voice low but shaking just enough to betray him. "You're trying to destroy me over assumptions and half-truths." Denise didn't respond. She didn't need to, because the evidence had already spoken. But someone else did. Jason. The voice came from behind him, female, firm, and entirely unexpected. Every head in the room turned at once. A woman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, mid-30s, poised, dressed in a simple black dress that contrasted sharply with the elegance of the wedding setting. Her posture was straight, her gaze steady, and there was no hesitation in the way she moved. Jason's entire body went rigid. "Rachel," he said the name, slipping out before he could stop it. "Rachel Green. I didn't know her personally, but I recognized the shift in the room immediately. This was not part of his plan." "Hi, Jason," she said calmly. Her voice carried not because she was loud, but because of the clarity behind it. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone tightening. Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the room, taking in the stunned faces, the tension, the pieces already falling apart. Then her eyes landed on Emily and softened just slightly. "I'm sorry," she said to her. "You deserve to know the truth." Jason stepped forward quickly. "You don't need to listen to her," he snapped. "She's an ex-girlfriend," Rachel interrupted smoothly. A ripple moved through the guests. Jason's jaw clenched. "Exactly," he said, "which means she's not exactly unbiased." Rachel gave a small, humorless smile. "No," she said, "I'm not unbiased. I'm experienced." That word landed harder than anything else. Experienced, because it implied something deeper, something repeated. Emily's voice was barely steady. "What is she talking about?" she asked, looking at Jason. He didn't answer. Rachel stepped closer. "I met Jason 3 years ago," she began. "Same story, same charm, same promises." Jason shook his head. "Don't do this," he said sharply. But Rachel didn't stop. "He told me he loved me within 2 months," she continued. "Talked about building a future, combining our lives, creating something bigger together." Emily's face paled, because she had heard those words before. Rachel glanced at her again. "I believed him," she said softly. Then her expression hardened, until I realized he was more interested in what I had than who I was. The room was completely silent now, every word landing, every piece falling into place. Jason let out a short laugh, trying to dismiss it. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're seriously going to believe a bitter ex over me?" Rachel didn't even look at him. "I signed documents too," she said, "ones I didn't fully understand at the time." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Emily's hand trembled again. "What kind of documents?" she asked. Rachel met her gaze directly. "The kind that gave him access," she said. Jason stepped forward, his voice rising. "That's not what happened. You left me with debt," Rachel cut in sharply, "and disappeared the second things didn't go your way." That hit hard, because this wasn't speculation anymore. This was a pattern, and everyone could see it. Jason's composure cracked further. "That's your version of events," he snapped, "not reality." Rachel shrugged slightly. "Funny," she said, "because it sounds a lot like what we just heard on that recording." A few guests murmured agreement. Jason's eyes darted around the room. For the first time, he was losing the audience. Completely. Emily took another step back, further away from him. Her voice was shaking but stronger now. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you do this before Jason's response came too fast?" "No, too sharp, too defensive, and that was all it took. Because when someone tells the truth, they don't sound like that. Emily shook her head slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Jason's frustration boiled over. "Because it didn't matter," he snapped. The words hung in the air, heavy, irreversible, and the moment he realized what he had just said, it was already too late, because that one sentence stripped everything away: the charm, the manipulation, the carefully crafted image, all of it, gone. Rachel didn't need to say anything else. Neither did Denise. Jason had just done their work for them. Emily's expression broke completely. "Didn't matter," she repeated, her voice hollow. Jason tried to recover. "That's not what I meant. Yes, it is," she said, and now she wasn't asking anymore. She was seeing, fully, clearly, for the first time. "I trusted you," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. Jason stepped toward her again. "Emily, listen, don't," she said sharply. The word cut through him, through the room, through everything, and he stopped. Because now she wasn't under his control anymore, not even close. Security moved in quietly at that point, Marcus giving a subtle signal as two uniformed guards approached from either side. Jason noticed. His expression shifted again, not into charm, not into frustration, but into something colder, something final. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, directed more at me than anyone else. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes," I said calmly, "it is." For a moment we just stood there, the two of us, everything unspoken, finally understood. Then the guards stepped closer. Sir, one of them said, "We're going to need you to come with us." Jason didn't resist, not physically, but the look he gave the room, the anger, the humiliation, the realization of what he had lost. It was unmistakable. He turned one last time, looking at Emily, and for a brief second, something almost human flickered there, regret, or maybe just the loss of what he thought he had secured. Then it was gone, and he was escorted out. The doors closed behind him. And just like that, the storm passed, but the damage remained. Emily stood there in the center of the ballroom, her wedding dress still pristine, her world completely shattered. And I knew the hardest part wasn't what had just happened, it was what came next. When the doors closed behind Jason, the silence didn't break right away. It settled, heavy, unavoidable. Like the aftermath of a storm where nothing moves because everything is still trying to understand what just happened. The ballroom, so carefully arranged for celebration just hours earlier, felt like a completely different place now. The flowers hadn't changed. The lights were still warm. The music system stood ready, but the illusion was gone, and without it, everything looked exposed. Emily didn't move. She stood exactly where Jason had left her hands hanging loosely at her sides, her breathing uneven. The dress she had chosen so carefully, the one she had dreamed of wearing, now felt like something she didn't belong in anymore. I wanted to go to her immediately, to hold her, to protect her from the weight of it all. But I didn't. Not yet, because I knew something she needed more than comfort in that moment. She needed space. Space to feel it, to process it, to understand that what just happened was real, and that it wasn't her fault. Around us, the guests began to shift slowly, unsure of what to do. Some whispered quietly. Others stood frozen still, trying to piece together the fragments of what they had witnessed. A wedding that had turned into an exposure. A celebration that had become a reckoning. Denise stepped back slightly, her role complete for now. Marcus remained near the entrance, watchful, ensuring Jason didn't attempt to return. And Rachel stood still, her arms loosely at her sides, her eyes resting on Emily, not with judgment, not with pity, but with something deeper, understanding. After a moment, Emily finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, barely there. "Did you know?" she asked. The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular. But I answered. "I suspected," I said gently. She turned to me slowly. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall yet. "You suspected," she repeated. "And you didn't tell me." The pain in her voice cut deeper than anything Jason had done, because this was the part I had feared the most. "I tried," I said softly, "but you weren't ready to hear it." Her expression tightened. "So you just waited?" she asked. "I waited for the truth to show itself," I said. She shook her head, stepping back. "No," she said, "you let this happen." The words hit me hard, but I didn't defend myself. Not immediately, because she needed to say it. She needed to release the anger before she could understand anything else. "I married him." She continued, her voice rising slightly. "I stood there and married him, and you knew something was wrong." Her voice cracked on the last word. And that was when the tears finally came. Not soft, not controlled, but sudden and overwhelming. "I trusted him," she said, her shoulders shaking. "I trusted him, Mom." I stepped forward then, slowly, carefully. I know I said, and I meant it, because I did know. I had watched it happen, watched her give her trust to someone who didn't deserve it, watched her build something real, with someone who never intended to honor it. Emily covered her face with her hands, trying to steady herself. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. "No," I said firmly. She looked up at me, startled by the shift in my tone. "You are not stupid," I continued. "You are manipulated. There's a difference." Her breath caught, and for the first time since the confrontation began, something in her expression softened. Not completely, but enough. Rachel stepped forward, then her voice gentle. "She's right," she said. Emily turned to her. "You believed him because he knew exactly how to make you believe him," Rachel added. "That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Emily stared at her for a moment, then asked the question I think she had been holding back since Rachel first spoke. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Rachel hesitated, just briefly. "Because no one warned me," she said. "And I didn't want that to happen to you." The honesty in her voice filled the space between them. Emily swallowed hard. "Thank you," she said quietly. Rachel nodded once, then stepped back, giving her space. The room remained quiet, but the energy had shifted again, from shock to something else, something more grounded, more real. Denise approached me, then her voice low. "She's going to need time," she said. "I know," I replied. "And there will be legal steps to follow," she added. "Annulment, documentation, protection of the trust. But none of that has to happen tonight." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. Denise gave me a small, understanding look. "You did what you had to do," she said. I didn't answer, because even though I knew that was true, it didn't make it easier. Emily took a slow breath, steadying herself. Then she looked down at her dress, at the ring on her finger, at everything that had just been stripped of meaning. "What do I do now?" she asked. It wasn't directed at anyone, but I answered anyway. "You take one step at a time," I said. She nodded slowly. Then after a long pause, she reached up and removed the ring. The motion was simple, quiet, but it carried the weight of everything she was letting go. She held it in her hand for a moment, staring at it, then closed her fingers around it and exhaled. The sound was shaky, but it was also freeing. "I can't stay here," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since all of this began, and in her eyes I saw it. Not blame, not anger, not confusion, but something fragile, something rebuilding. "Can we go home?" she asked softly. My chest tightened, because that word, home, meant everything. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Of course we can." I reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. She held on, tightly, as we walked out of that ballroom together, leaving behind the broken pieces of a night that was never what it seemed. And as the doors closed behind us, I realized something. Jason Reed had planned that moment of humiliation so carefully, so precisely. He thought it would strip me of my power, of my voice, of my place in my daughter's life. But in the end, it did the opposite. Because that moment, that single cruel act, was the one thing that exposed him completely. And in doing so, it gave my daughter something he never intended to give her: the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free. The drive home was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful or even comfortable, but the kind that settles in after something too big to process all at once. The kind where words exist, but they don't quite know how to come out yet. Emily sat in the passenger seat, still in her wedding dress, her hands resting in her lap fingers loosely curled around the ring she had taken off. She hadn't said much since we left the ballroom, and I didn't push, because I knew this part couldn't be rushed. Grief doesn't follow instructions. It doesn't move on command. It unfolds, slowly, unevenly, in its own time. When we pulled into my driveway, she looked up at the house for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't think I'd be coming back here like this," she said quietly. I turned off the engine. "Neither did I replied. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Then she opened the door. We walked inside together. The house felt exactly the same as it always had. Warm, familiar, safe, and for the first time that night, I saw something shift in her posture. Just slightly, like her body recognized something her mind was still catching up to. I led her into the living room where the soft glow of a lamp filled the space. She sat down, slowly smoothing her dress absent-mindedly, as if trying to understand how she still fit into it. "I feel like I'm still there," she said after a moment. "Like I'm going to wake up and it's all going to be different." I sat across from her. "It won't be," I said gently, "but that doesn't mean it won't get better." She nodded, but her eyes filled again. I keep replaying everything she whispered. Every conversation, every moment I should have seen something, and didn't. "That's what people like him count on," I said softly. "They don't show you who they are all at once." She looked up at me. "They show you just enough truth to make the lie believable." Her lips trembled slightly. "I loved him," she said. The words came out raw, unfiltered, and they carried a weight I felt in my chest. "I know," I said. "And now I don't even know what was real," she continued. Was any of it real? That question, that was the hardest one, because there isn't a simple answer. There were real moments, I said carefully, but they were built on something that wasn't. She swallowed hard. "So it was all fake." "No," I said gently. "But it wasn't honest." She leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes. "I feel like I don't trust myself anymore," she admitted. That hit me, deep, because that's what damage like this does. It doesn't just break your trust in someone else, it breaks your trust in your own judgment. I leaned forward slightly. "Emily," I said softly, "look at me." She opened her eyes. Reluctantly. "You trusted someone who worked very hard to earn that trust," I said. "That doesn't mean your instincts are broken." But I ignored things she said. "You saw it, I didn't." "I saw pieces," I replied. "You were inside it. That's different." She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to understand that, as if trying to believe it. Then her expression shifted slightly. "You knew more than you told me," she said. There was no accusation in her voice this time, just curiosity and something else, something closer to understanding. I took a slow breath. "Yes," I said. She nodded once. Why, she asked. That question deserved an honest answer. "Because I was afraid," I said. Her brow furrowed. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that if I pushed too hard, you'd choose him over me," I said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy, real. Her expression softened. I wouldn't have she started, then stopped. Because part of her knew she might have. "I didn't have proof at first," I continued, "just instinct. And instinct isn't always enough when someone is in love." She looked down at her hands. "And when you did have proof?" she asked. "I waited," I said. "Until it couldn't be denied." Her grip on the ring tightened slightly. "That moment," she whispered, "when he—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The memory was still too close, too sharp. "I heard what he said," before I said gently, "about humiliating someone in public, about breaking their credibility." Her eyes widened slightly. "You knew she asked." "I suspected," I said, "but I needed him to show it." She stared at me. And this time, there was no anger, just a quiet realization. "You let him do it," she said. I didn't look away. "I let him reveal himself," I replied. She exhaled slowly, processing, understanding. And then, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough for her to reach across the space between us and take my hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. The words broke something open inside me. "You don't have anything to be sorry for," I said quickly. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I shut you out. I didn't listen. I thought you were trying to control me." I shook my head gently. "You were protecting your relationship," I said. "That's what people do when they love someone." Her eyes filled again. "But I hurt you," she said. I squeezed her hand. "And I would go through it again," I said. "Every time, if it meant you were safe in the end." That was the truth. Simple, unconditional. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for the first time in weeks, I saw my daughter again. Not the version shaped by someone else's influence, not the version second-guessing herself, but the one I had raised. Strong, thoughtful, capable of growth. "I don't want to be that person again," she said quietly. "You're not," I replied. "I let him change me," she continued. "No," I said firmly, "he tried to. But you're still here." She held my gaze, and slowly, she nodded. We sat there for a long time after that, not talking much, just being, letting the weight of everything settle, letting the silence become something softer, something healing. Eventually, she stood up looking down at her dress again. "I need to take this off," she said. I smiled gently. "I'll get you something comfortable." As I walked toward the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Relief. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not yet. But because the most important thing, the thing I had been fighting for since the very beginning, was still intact, my daughter. And as she disappeared into her old room, closing the door softly behind her, I realized something else. Jason Reed had taken a lot from her. Trust, time, a version of the future she believed in, but he hadn't taken everything. Because she still had the one thing he could never control, the ability to see the truth and choose something better. The house felt different the next morning. Not because anything had changed physically, the same soft light filtered through the curtains, the same familiar creaks echoed in the hallway, but because everything inside it had shifted. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there was no tension. No quiet pressure sitting beneath the surface, just stillness, real stillness. I woke early out of habit and made my way into the kitchen. The routine grounded me. Coffee brewing toast, warming small motions that reminded me life hadn't stopped, even if it felt like it had the night before. For a moment I allowed myself to breathe, then I heard footsteps, soft, slow, Emily. She entered the kitchen wearing one of her old college sweatshirts, her hair pulled back loosely, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger like that, not untouched by what had happened, but no longer performing strength she didn't feel. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied. She hesitated near the doorway like she wasn't sure where to stand. I gestured toward the chair across from me. "Sit," I said gently. I made coffee. She nodded and sat down, wrapping her hands around the mug like she needed the warmth more than the drink itself. For a few minutes, we didn't speak. And this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was careful, respectful, healing. Finally, she broke it. "I keep expecting my phone to ring," she said. I looked up. "From him?" I asked. She nodded. "I turned it off last night," she added. "I didn't want to see anything." "That was a good decision," I said. She stared down at her coffee. "I don't know what I'll do if he calls," she admitted. I leaned back slightly. "You don't have to answer," I said. "Not today, not tomorrow, not until you're ready." She exhaled slowly. "Part of me wants to hear what he'll say," she confessed. "Like, maybe there's some explanation I haven't heard yet. That was honest, painfully honest." And I understood it. "Closure doesn't always come from the other person," I said softly. She looked up at me. "Sometimes," I continued, "it comes from recognizing what you already know." She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I know he lied," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I know he manipulated me," she added. "Yes." Her voice dropped slightly. "I just don't know how I missed it." There it was again. That question. The one that lingers after betrayal. I reached across the table. "You didn't miss it," I said. "You trusted him." She swallowed. "That feels like the same thing right now." "It's not," I said firmly. "Trust is something you give. Deception is something he created. Those are two different things." She sat with that, letting it settle. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said quietly. It wasn't full acceptance. Not yet, but it was a step. And that was enough. Later that afternoon, we met with Denise again, this time in a smaller office, more private, more contained. The atmosphere felt different from the day before, less urgent, more structured. Now we were dealing with what came after the truth, the consequences. Denise greeted Emily with a gentle nod. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances," she said. Emily managed a small, polite smile. "Me too," she replied. We sat down together and Denise began outlining the next steps. Given the situation, she said we can pursue an annulment based on misrepresentation and intent to deceive. Emily listened carefully. "What does that mean for me?" she asked. "It means the marriage can be legally invalidated," Denise explained, as if it never existed in the eyes of the law. Emily nodded slowly. "And the documents I signed?" she asked. "We've already taken steps to nullify their impact," Denise said. "Given the evidence of coercion and lack of full disclosure, they will not hold." Relief flickered across Emily's face, subtle, but real. "And him?" she asked. Denise's expression remained composed. "His financial situation and prior behavior may lead to further investigation," she said, "but that process is separate from your immediate protection." Emily leaned back slightly, processing. "I don't want anything from him," she said after a moment. "I just want it to be over." Denise nodded. "That can be arranged." The conversation continued, moving through details, timelines, legal steps. It was practical, grounded, necessary. But what struck me most wasn't the legal clarity. It was Emily, the way she listened, the way she asked questions, the way she stayed present even when the subject matter was difficult. She wasn't avoiding anymore. She was facing it, and that mattered more than anything. In the days that followed, life didn't return to normal, but it began to move forward. Slowly. Emily started therapy. At first she was hesitant, unsure of what to say, unsure of what she needed. But she went. And that alone was a victory. We spent more time together too. Not in the forced way we had before, not in the tense, careful way, but naturally. Cooking meals, taking walks, talking about things that had nothing to do with Jason, and sometimes talking about everything that did. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily spoke quietly. "I keep thinking about that moment," she said. I turned to her. "Which one?" She looked out into the distance. "When he put the cake in your face," she said. I didn't respond right away. "Why?" I asked gently. "Because something felt wrong before that," she said. "I just didn't listen to it." I nodded. "That feeling matters," I said. She glanced at me. I ignored it, she admitted. "Now you won't," I replied. She smiled slightly, and it was the first real smile I had seen from her since the wedding. Not forced, not fragile, just real. "I think I needed to see it that clearly," she said. "As painful as it was." She nodded. Yes, I sat with that, because she was right. Sometimes clarity only comes after the illusion breaks completely. "I'm proud of you," I said. She looked at me surprised, for what she asked. "For facing it," I said, "for not running from it." She considered that, then nodded. "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "You don't have to feel it," I said. "You're already doing it." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. And for the first time in a long time, she looked at peace, not fully healed, not completely whole, but moving in that direction. And that was enough, because healing isn't a moment, it's a process. And we had finally begun it, together. There are some endings that don't feel like endings at all. They feel like quiet beginnings, not loud, not dramatic, but steady, grounded, real. That's what life felt like a few months after the wedding, or what was supposed to be a wedding. Time had done what it always does, moved forward whether we were ready or not. But this time we chose to move with it, not by forgetting what happened, but by understanding it, learning from it, and deciding who we wanted to be after it. Emily stood in the kitchen that afternoon, sunlight pouring through the windows as she carefully arranged a tray of food. Nothing extravagant, just simple dishes she had learned to make over the past few weeks. She moved differently now, not rushed, not uncertain, intentional. I watched her for a moment before stepping in. "You've gotten good at this," I said with a small smile. She glanced up, returning it. "I had a good teacher," she replied. I raised an eyebrow. "I don't remember teaching you how to plate things like that." She laughed softly. "You taught me how to start over," she said. The words settled in the space between us, and I felt them, because that's exactly what this had been. Not just recovery, a restart. Later that evening, a few close friends and family members gathered at the house. Nothing formal, no decorations, no pressure, just people who cared showing up without expectation. It wasn't a replacement for the wedding. It wasn't meant to be. It was something else. Something honest. Emily stood in front of them, holding a glass, not champagne this time, just sparkling water. Her fingers were steady. Her posture relaxed, her voice calm. "I didn't think I'd be standing here like this," she began. A few soft smiles spread through the room. "But I'm grateful I am," she continued. Her eyes moved across the faces in front of her, lingering for a moment on mine. "I thought I understood what love looked like," she said. "I thought it was about intensity, about connection, about someone choosing you so completely that it felt impossible to question." She paused, and I was wrong. The honesty in her voice didn't carry shame. It carried clarity. "I confused charm with character," she said. "I confused attention with respect, and I ignored the parts of myself that knew something wasn't right because I didn't want to lose what I thought I had." The room was silent, listening, understanding. "But here's what I've learned," she continued. "Love that requires you to shrink isn't love. Love that makes you question your own voice isn't love. And love that needs control to survive was never real to begin with." I felt my chest tighten slightly, because those words, they weren't just hers. They were hard-earned, lived. "I almost lost myself trying to hold on to something that was never meant for me," she said. But I didn't. "And that's because of the people who didn't give up on me even when I pushed them away." Her eyes met mine again, and this time they stayed there, especially my mom, she added softly. Emotion rose in my throat, but I held it back, because this wasn't about me. This was about her and who she had become. "She saw things I didn't want to see," Emily continued. "She stood her ground when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And even when I didn't understand her choices, she never stopped protecting me." A few people nodded quietly. I didn't appreciate that at the time, she admitted. But I do now. She took a small breath. "And if there's one thing I want to say to anyone listening, it's this: pay attention to the people who love you enough to tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Her voice softened slightly, because they're not trying to control you, they're trying to protect you. She raised her glass slightly. "To second chances," she said, "and to choosing better." The room echoed the gesture, quiet but sincere, and in that moment, there was no loss, no regret, just peace. After everyone left, the house returned to its usual stillness. I stepped outside onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin, the distant hum of the city barely audible. Emily joined me a few minutes later, leaning against the railing beside me. "That felt good," she said. "It sounded like it," I replied. She smiled slightly. "I meant it," she said. "I know," I said. We stood there for a while, watching the quiet stretch of darkness beyond the yard. Then she spoke again. "Do you ever think about that moment?" she asked. I knew exactly which one she meant. "The cake," I said. She nodded. I let out a slow breath. "Sometimes," I admitted. She was quiet for a moment. "I used to think that was the worst part," she said. I glanced at her. And now I asked. She turned slightly, meeting my eyes. "Now I think it was the best thing that could have happened," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold statement," I said. She smiled faintly. It exposed everything she explained, all at once. No more guessing, no more doubt. She looked back out into the night. "If that hadn't happened, I might still be with him," she added. That thought settled heavily between us, because it was true. Completely. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes the worst moments are the ones that save us," I said. She exhaled softly. "I'm just glad I didn't lose you in the process," she said. I turned toward her fully. "You never could," I said. And I meant it, because no matter how far she had drifted, no matter how complicated things had become, that connection had never truly broken. It had only been tested. And now it was stronger for it. We stood there a while longer, the silence comfortable, the air steady. And as I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not just resilience, not just recovery, but clarity. The kind that doesn't come easily, the kind that changes you. Jason Reed thought he had taken something from us that night, thought he had humiliated me, diminished me, stripped me of my place. But what he didn't understand, what he never understood, was that respect isn't something someone else can take from you. It's something you carry within yourself. And in trying to break me, he revealed himself completely. And in doing so, he gave my daughter the one thing she needed most, the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only foundation worth building anything on. There's something I want you to take with you after hearing my story, because what happened that night, it wasn't just about a wedding, It was about something much deeper. It was about how easily we can mistake charm for character, attention for love, and silence for peace. Especially when we want something to be real, especially when we're afraid of losing it. I've lived long enough to understand this. The most dangerous people aren't always the loudest ones. They're the ones who know exactly what to say, exactly how to act, and exactly when to shift, just enough to keep you questioning yourself instead of them. And if you're a mother like me, you already know this feeling, that quiet voice inside you, that instinct that tells you something isn't right even when you can't prove it yet. Don't ignore it, because that voice doesn't come from fear. It comes from experience, from love, from a lifetime of learning what safety and danger really look like. And if you're someone who's ever doubted yourself after being hurt, please hear this. You are not weak for trusting someone. You are not foolish for believing in love. But you do have a responsibility to yourself to walk away when that love starts asking you to disappear. Real love doesn't silence you. It doesn't shrink you. It doesn't humiliate you. Real love respects you, protects you, and allows you to remain fully yourself. If you've ever been in a situation where something didn't feel right, I want to ask you, did you listen to that feeling, or did you push it aside? Share your experience in the comments. I read them, and you're not alone in this. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, understood, or even just a little more aware, please take a moment to like and subscribe, because stories like this matter. They remind us, they protect us, and sometimes they help us find our way back to ourselves. Also tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'd love to know who's here with me at this moment. Thank you for listening. And remember, you deserve a love that never asks you to lose yourself.